I'm Coach Tarek.
And I'm Vanessa.
We are your movement experts, and we are here to educate health and fitness professionals with the tools to create real change for and within the industry. Hello, it's Tarek, your co-host of the Purpose-Driven Movement podcast. I just had a fascinating conversation with Dr. Simon Baarbé and Sam from TotalFusion. We took a deep dive into the whole concept of biohacking, and in particular, looking at these elements of it being lifespan, longevity, the importance of muscle mass, VO2 max, and much, much more. It's a fascinating conversation for those who are really interested in this idea of biohacking and also interested in the concept of longevity, lifespan, and the importance of overall health. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. It's well worth it. Check out FTI's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online courses. Simply go to www.functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout. Simon Baarbé and Sam Merza. I hope I've said that correct. Simon from TotalFusion. How are you both doing today?
Well, thank you, and thanks for having us on.
And we're good, mate. Very good.
Pleasure. Got you back on, Sam. You wanted more?
Yeah, I thought one wasn't quite enough, so it'd be good to have another chat, but this time I'll be in the background more so. We've got the doctor from TotalFusion here, a medical director, chairman of the medical board as such, who's going to probably be able to give a lot better insight into some of the things that I spoke about last time in passing, just a bit more medical information, a bit more background on it. So yeah, really excited.
Beautiful. And leading with that, what is this whole idea of biohacking, Simon? You know, like, where are the origins? What is it kind of all about?
Great question. As to the origins in popular culture, I'm not up to speed on those nuances. I can't speak to that specifically. But from my understanding, my awareness, it depends on how you define biohacking, and it can range anywhere from the bizarre and absurd and deleterious to very proactive, evidence-informed, precision preventative medicine. And so it is a buzz term that covers, I believe, everything within that spectrum.
And where did it all begin for you and your quest into becoming a medical director and, of course, doctor, and this whole notion of biohacking?
Looking back, I think it probably began back in the 90s. I'm dating myself giving that date, but I've always been interested in performance and optimizing and had some disdain for the inevitability of growing older and more decrepit, and it just didn't seem like a worthy thing to look forward to. Ultimately, though, I think that mindset that perhaps leads one not to settle for such things as an inevitability and wanting things to be optimized led me towards engineering, which then led me towards data analysis and private investigation. And it wasn't until some difficult cases led to a change of heart and I realized I care more about how people are doing than what they did, that I then had a change to medicine, and that mentality is carried through in my medical career as well.
Yeah, terrific. And that sort of gestalt kind of aspect of the sum being greater than its part leads into my next question in and around longevity and health span. What do those all mean to you, and why are those notions really important to this concept of biohacking and for the general population out there?
That's a great question. I think the easiest way to get into this first would be to clear up some misconceptions, and then it'll make it easier for all of us to talk about this and share our understanding with your audience. I have spoken to a lot of people who hear about what I do or get a notion of it or just in concept speaking about aging, and most people will say something to the effect of, I don't want to live a long time. I don't want to live a long life, because they by default equate that long life with ineptitude. It's a classic conversation I would have amongst nurses while in hospital, seeing people in their 60s, 70s falling apart, losing their dignity, not living well, and being surrounded by very unhealthy people taking care of these more unhealthy people, knowing what the inevitability is and just assuming, well, then I'd rather die in my 60s than experience that. And that's where the misconception that living a long time means living a long time unwell comes from. I would never want anyone to live a long life bedridden in misery without dignity or quality of life. And fortunately, those who live the longest lives die of the exact same things for the most part as people who live the shortest lives. They just get those diseases later in life. Their period of chronic illness is about the same time-wise. The onset is just much later. So that's where the concept of health span comes in. If all we care about is how well you live and how long you live well, inevitably, you're likely to have more life. We just need to delay the onset of age-related chronic disease. And the majority of these are modifiable in their onset. We can't make any promises. We can't predict the future. But we can shift a person's odds of likelihood of accumulation of age-related chronic disease at any given time.
So I think it's a really clear and important point, because I've spoken about this with my wife beforehand, is I don't want to keep someone alive or stay myself living for a long time and just be in a vegetative state, for lack of a better term, or, be unable to look after myself, or you lose your mental acuity, you lose your physical confidence, you become reliant upon other people. And I think that's a really interesting point, which I didn't realize, which again is part of the reason I'm here as a learning opportunity, is that you said the span of someone's chronic health issue, essentially from onset to death, I guess, is essentially the same whether it generally, or often the same, whether it happens when you're 50 or whether it happens when you're 90. So the goal then is obviously to find ways to push everything back as long as possible to delay that, often inevitability for some people. That's a really good way to look at it, which I didn't realize.
It is wonderfully said. And, like the whole idea of prevention is better than the cure seems to be kind of the ethos here in our conversation. And it's, it's more than simply this conversation, although it is important to touch on some of those strategies that are within the power of that person to take ownership. What would you say from your perspective they are, and this is certainly talking about not having to spend too many dollars on expensive ways to do so. What would be some of the crucial elements there that could increase prevention and provide that lifespan and quality of life?
I like how you set up that question, because there's no end to the weird and wonderful, and we could speak about that for hours, and to an extent that is what we do. But the foundation always is exercise, sleep, nutrition. And truthfully, there's nothing in all of medicine I can prescribe for a patient that they could go do for an hour that's going to do them more good than an hour of effective exercise.
Which is a really important part that's lost. We spoke about this before, because Simon and I have some similar opinions on a few things. And one reason that when I first started with this business, I quite really enjoyed one of the first comments he made to me was that it's very rarely you could prescribe a medicine which is going to actually have more of a long-term benefit effect to someone than doing exercise instead, sort of thing. Because unfortunately, we're in a society which overprescribes a pill as a medical intervention, when potentially there's other ways that could have been prevented earlier. And we've got to the point where either we're prescribing because the person's unable to change or feels unable to change parts of their life. Not lazy is a bad term, but easy prescription, take a pill, you're going to be okay, rather than start moving, drop some body weight, whether it's diabetes, whether it's blood pressure, like bad back, you don't need painkillers all the time. You might lose 20 kilos. Yeah, that's right. You might lose 20 kilos and lift a bit of weights and that benefits. So I think really want to be is we can help with preventing the necessity for some of these medications.
To an extent, yes. Two things I want to add to that. I want to make it clear that we're talking about cumulative chronic disease and not acute disease, acute illness.
Yes, absolutely.
If you're ill, you need your antibiotics, you've had whatever, medicine's a wonderful tool.
Well, deadlifts, not for antibiotics. I can't deadlift my way out of that one.
The dead lips, you mean?
That's right. That's how it works.
Yeah. And then the other point I want to make is, in our practice, all tools are in our toolbox, which is why foundationally exercise and nutrition is almost always the go-to tool. But in trying to do what we're doing, trying to live as long as you can possibly live, as well as you can possibly live, by definition, that's a battle I promise you will lose. And because loss of this battle is inevitable, and if you want to give it your best go, it's therefore the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And so I'm not going to take any tools out of the toolbox. Always exercise, always nutrition. But if I can add a medication, a supplement, a drug, a nutrient that's also going to serve our purpose, by all means, I'll do it. And I think to try to adhere to a philosophy that would force you to then modify your toolbox is disingenuous. So rather than saying, I will do this without medication, or I will only use natural supplements, whatever that arbitrary definition is, or I will only do this or only do that, I think really isn't paying respect to what we're trying to do. And so whatever is within medical science that works and is most effective and is the best tool for the job, we will use. And quite often that still is drugs, supplements, medications, hormones, nutrients, you name it.
There's obviously a requirement, same as in the health and fitness industry, which I know a lot of the listeners are from, is that we know ourselves, each body that we work with is unique in their own way, and they react well and not as well to certain things. And I think it probably comes across in everything that we're doing here at TotalFusion and everything that's in we actually might touch on this term because I'm not going to use it again, but I'm talking about biohacking as a term, which is probably one that Simon will want to discuss at some point. The longevity, the health span space is that individuals react to different things in different ways. And one thing that I am probably more, not passionate about, that's the wrong word, maybe I have more stock in than someone from a medical background. Sometimes to get the best results, we need to create a mentality which thinks it's winning even before it maybe is winning, like the placebo effect, right? Same
It's
thing.
real.
Yeah, placebo effect is real. So it's the same concept where I might know the science tells me that I need to have 3 minutes of cold exposure therapy to get a medical physiological change in my body. But if I do it for 30 seconds, I feel good. I walk away that I'm proud of myself. I've done it and I'm going to go back and do something again tomorrow, as opposed to thinking to myself, I failed because I didn't achieve what's going to make a physiological difference at this stage. And maybe if I can build up to it in the future, or using placebo at the start in the future, I'll then be able to achieve a physiological response. So I think for me, there's also that habit building of enabling people to get lots of different wins in the facility that makes them keep coming back as well, which is obviously going to be key to my kind of thought process there. But I saw the flare up, and again, we're on an audio listening podcast here, but I did see the flare up in Simon's shoulders, as we mentioned, biohacking, which I'll be curious to dig into a little bit. And again, like Tarek, we spoke about this last time for me, and I spoke about Simon before. No information is bad information if it's read. If it's actions, that's a different story. But if it's read, it increases a level of interest. Then someone goes to speak to an expert, and then they can learn what is medically correct, and then they can be adjusted and moved in the right direction. So when I was thinking about what I might change in the industry, I thought about, would you change the amount of information? And actually, no, because it enables a spread to more people. And then when they go and seek out an expert, they can be readjusted to where they need to go. So biohacking is a term which is quite well renowned. It's something that people know biology, that's my body, hacking, cheating, whatever you want to class it. So what's your thoughts, Simon? Biohacking, what does that mean to you, if anything? And why does health span probably mean more?
Biohacking at its best could be thought of as precision preventative medicine. And then, to borrow a term from a good friend of mine, another way to think of it would be positive medicine, analogous to positive psychology. Rather than waiting until it all goes wrong, you end up in the ward and then you finally see a psychiatrist. What about a little positive psychology, some proactive behavior, meditation, self-care, whatever it might be? And that's become globally accepted. But positive medicine is still looked down on and often stigmatized as pandering to the worried well, when there's a difference between the worried well and positive medicine.
That makes better sense. But your communication with your clients, because they're not patients, they're clients, is about health span. But I guess, does that encompass those same elements, the positive?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's foundational. And I guess to further make a point, I've made this point before, the greatest biohack ever invented that is wildly unnatural would be something like brushing your teeth. So it doesn't need to involve lights and colors and gray market supplements or you name it. Any intervention that has a net positive effect and is therefore worth doing, if done the appropriate amount, you could overbrush your teeth just as you could underbrush your teeth, is worth doing. And there's a balance. There's an amount that shouldn't be done. And
I suppose it is quite unnatural when you mention it that way. It's not something that we were...
they don't grow on trees.
They don't grow on trees, yeah, that's right.
That's an interesting point, though, that you've touched on, Sam, because that's the element there is biohacking might have an element or be synonymous with being tactical, short-term, or, how do I, create these heuristics, for the human body, shortcuts versus being strategic, which lifespan, longevity seem to be. So is there some misnomers there, perhaps, Simon, in terms of biohacking potentially being perceived as a quick fix versus, tactical versus a strategic, more long-term perspective?
I mean, I can't speak to what others who use this term define it as, but within our practice, we always make an effort to make the distinction between short-term vitality and long-term longevity, and the two are often orthogonal or completely counter to one another, though not always. Examples might be, say you only cared about your vitality now. I could, in theory, load you up with copious amounts of growth hormone. You'd leave feeling wonderful. I don't know if you'd be around for that long, depending on how nuts we went with that. Conversely, there's a lot you can do that might not convey the most jacked, thriving, overactive phenotype right now, but you're far more likely to be thriving into old age. Most, though, coincide. In most cases, feeling better now results in higher likelihood of doing better later.
Yeah, well said. Sam, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment, is that what we find for most of the clients that we see in this kind of health span, the medical concierge program, the, top level support, is that they want to continue to operate at a really high level now. They want to feel really good, feel better, both mentally and physically. But by actually engaging with an expert and then his team around them, they're given all of those tools and guidelines, which means that, yes, they're all going to improve and feel better now, but they're also going to have that long-term benefit, which is what they're after. Because you'll find most of the people we're dealing with as business owners, as a common one, business owners, they want to keep operating their business to a point, grow it, but they still want to see their family. They still want to sleep enough. They don't want to be stressed the whole time. They still want to exercise and stay in shape. And they're adding to their workload without more hours of the day. We don't get more hours of the day. They're just adding to their workload. And so they need someone to be able to guide that journey. So if they do have half an hour a day or an hour a day to focus on themselves, whether it is nutrition-based or exercise-based, or whether it's, a lot of them now have got, saunas at home, or they've got compression boots, or, they go and get their bloods done so they actually know that the doctor knows kind of what best to do with them. They're trying to be more efficient with their time because they don't have all of the hours of the day. Like, if we wanted to be the best person we could right now, we're probably not going to be working, unfortunately. You've got no time for that. We're doing everything else there is to do. So a lot of them are looking for that efficiency and that guidance of, I need to win now, and I need to be operating like a 40-year-old when I'm 60, like a 50-year-old when I'm 70, and so on and so forth for as long as they can until the cliff kind of ends, right? It's like the rapid demise at the end.
Could that be, Simon, part of the problem in terms of the practitioner, the doctor, and the practitioner being too busy, having to go through consults after consults? Is that potentially a problem that can occur or is out there, meaning that some of these more measured responses and providing more preventative, because I'm totally with you, there are acute problems, you need to follow a protocol, but is there a sense of potential laziness or busyness or both when it comes to then transitioning away from that acute to, prevent that chronic or the side effects of those medications, for example, right? Yeah, more on your perspective in terms of, is that a potential problem, being caught up with too many clients, patients, or both?
Yes, and I think virtually every GP would acknowledge that it is suboptimal. The system is set up to try to provide the greatest good for the greatest number at the least cost. And a lot of doctors are very frustrated with the 10-minute appointment model and not being able to do the appropriate follow-up or the appropriate level of intervention. And I think that disconnect between a doctor's intention and the reality of what a doctor can provide as limited by the system leads to a lot of doctor burnout, as well as not amazing outcomes for a client. That being said, the healthcare system we have by global standards is amazing. And by no means am I saying it's no good. I encourage everyone, please, you pay your taxes, go see your doctor. There is a lot of good still to be had from it.
100%. And we work, I guess, in conjunction and in support of the GPs. So Simon's work doesn't replace the GP. They still need that primary care person when they come to see us, because we still want them to be looked after, like you said, from acute disease issues. And for example, like if we're doing one of our support mechanisms as an MRI, for example, and they find a solid tumor, that goes to the GP. Because their primary care doctor needs to be aware of that person's situation to deal with acute issues that do come up. When they look at how to optimize based on their bloods, this is a phrase that Simon's used with me in the past, which I'll steal from him right now, which is like, your GP is definitely going to, for those red flags, and go, there's something wrong, we have a red flag, that's an issue. Where we kind of play is, there's an orange flag that may turn red in the future, and stop me, Simon, when you need to, that may turn red in the future, and we need to ensure that there's the opportunity to have a positive outcome on that orange or amber flag, so it has the least likelihood or turning red happens as far into the future as possible. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely fair. Aim for everybody to have greater success, and if we can make a GP's job easier, and that GP is also therefore having better success with their patient, that's great. That's what we're aiming to do.
You touched on, Simon, the positive medicine, and if we can then have a focused kind of part of the conversation now on TotalFusion and how you guys do positive medicine, and you touch on it a little bit there, Sam. Like if you were to walk us through what typically may occur for a client or a patient, I mean, obviously depending on what they present, but how does it look, whether, Sam or Simon or both want to answer this, when someone walks into TotalFusion? Because I think this is pretty important. If we want to understand positive medicine, we need an example. And from my perspective, none better than TotalFusion here. So over to you.
What we do is very involved. It's not as simple as someone comes in, they do one test or they get one analysis, we have an answer, we send them on their way. As we continue to work with the client and get to know them personally, professionally, medically, chemically, historically, you name it, we iteratively learn more and more about their presumed natural health trajectory. We never really know, we can't predict the future, but based on biomarkers, family history, physical function, vital signs, past exposures, psychological dispositions, you name it, we can, relative to the average mortality assessment, get a sense of what might or might not proportionally be more of a concern for our client. And as we begin to glean those hints, we begin to act and mitigate to reduce one's risks the best we can. So ultimately, at the end of the process, we come away with a good strategy for the client to continue with without ever having learned their truest probable natural health trajectory, because we're intervening right from the beginning.
Yeah, terrific. Sam, did you want to add anything else in terms of the elements that help support the continual journey of lifespan and longevity within the context of TotalFusion?
Yeah, for sure. But I'll drop a couple of buzzwords across to Simon, who will elaborate on why they're so important and why he focuses on those ones. So obviously, as he mentioned, you get the background checks, your health history, your family history, what we can get from your GPs. We have tests that we want to include in there, whether that's, blood tests, whether it's MRIs, whether it's gene testing, hormone profiling, like all these amazing tools that the doctor kind of does. And then there's a couple of things which I'll just drop onto his lap that I think he's better positioned to talk about. One of them is muscle mass. So Simon, muscle mass, why?
So there's very few universals in precision preventative medicine when it's highly personalized, but there are two. One is VO2 max, the other is muscle mass. We have minimum percentile thresholds that we want all of our clients to achieve. Muscle mass is of particular importance because it's predictive, just as a number, predictive of all-cause mortality and length of life. It's highly correlated with quality of life. The more muscle mass you have, the longer you retain your bone density, the less likely you are to fracture a hip in old age, the more likely you are to prevent a fall, the more free you're likely to be to interact with grandchildren, climb a flight of stairs, whatever you need to do to be dignified and independent. Muscle is also the only large tissue reservoir for glucose. We have our liver, we have other tissues. Our liver is usually topped up, and even if not, it only holds a finite amount of glucose. But we all want to eat in a way that we enjoy. We get stressed out. When we do, our livers pump out a lot of glucose. That glucose needs a place to go. And the only sink to take up a large amount of it very quickly is muscle mass. And something we see commonly is people who have not had the nutrition to support the muscle mass, even if they exercise, or worst case scenario, have not had both, often end up at greater risk of metabolic dysfunction in middle age and later. And the downstream effects of that are increased risk of the majority of the age-related chronic diseases, cancer, heart disease, dementia, diabetes, you name it.
We won't go into this now because I just literally heard it the other day as a piece of fresh research around Alzheimer's, dementia being kind of like almost to be considered like a diabetes of the brain, which is nothing I'd heard before. We're not going to go into it now because I'm probably talking out of shop, but it was interesting. So you mentioned muscle mass. The other one I was going to mention was VO2 max, which you did touch on, but why don't you tell us VO2 max, why that's important as well?
There's a lot of debate mechanistically as to exactly why it's important. People can talk in circles about cause and effect, but ultimately we know that it is. And it used to be theorized that there was sort of a J-shaped curve of benefit where you can be fit and it's good, but then you can overdo it and you can be too fit and that's really bad. It turns out that's not the case. It's just the training one would undergo in trying to achieve that level of fitness if they weren't training optimally and efficiently, and rather they were running themselves into the ground. But as far as all-cause mortality, dementia risk, cerebral vascular dementia especially, cancer risk, cardiovascular fitness is strongly correlated with increased survivability in old age.
So I guess if we look at those two key things, muscle mass and VO2 max, everything we do in our facility, we have very much weighted towards health and fitness, right? We're a gym, we've got a multi-level gym. We've got a heap of highly qualified fitness staff. And then to support ongoing, you got physio, you got EPs. All of our group fitness, the boutique rooms are fantastic. They cover off those massively. There's one which is probably more, it's definitely not subjective, but I'm not sure what objective evidence there is for it, but it's the mental health aspect. And I guess that breathing, that stress, I suppose it all relates to cortisol, right? It's kind of stress related, it's breathing. So we got yoga and those types of parts of the puzzle. Is there some way you can put, I guess mental health is probably too much of a general term, but a mental well-being is still too general of a term. Where would you see, you got muscle, you got VO2 max, where does that kind of cortisol management, stress management sit as well?
It's critical. Otherwise, why bother? But humbly, I will say that is also the area that I have the least knowledge and expertise in and probably struggle with the most myself.
Yes.
So I'm side by side with everyone else on this. I'm certainly not an authority, although I'm aspiring to figure it out. Sam, going back to something you said earlier about psychology and behavior change and influence and placebo, one of the lessons I think I've learned the most in this journey and humbly continue to relearn again and again is at its foundation, mental health and psychology is key to everything we're doing because we have to understand why people want this. What is their why? How do we leverage that? How do we keep them motivated or disciplined or on track? How do we implement those behavior changes? And it's unique for all of us.
Yeah, it is. And that's why we've brought a psychologist on board recently. At one of our sites there is it's such an important part for people and building up mental resilience. We know 99% sure that it is now evidence-based. I can say in front of a doctor. We know that hot and cold exposure therapy, especially cold exposure therapy, can help improve mental resilience and help people manage their fight and flight responses and their cortisol control and sympathetic nervous systems and stuff. So I didn't get a slap on the wrist there from the doctors. Okay. So when we look at TotalFusion, we are looking across all of these bases because the client's journey, it does need all of it. Now, to get the best outcome, there's opportunities to do a lot of different things. And the one we haven't fully touched on because it's probably neither of our specialty, which is why we have a specialist here, is the dietitian. So obviously the diet someone has, we know now, and it was fringe 15 years ago, but we now know like gut bacteria has a really strong effect upon neurochemistry about your brain and how it works and how you think and how you feel. Correct me if I'm wrong again. But, gut health, what you eat, how that affects your body, how that affects your mood, how that affects your activity is key as well. And I know you work closely with a dietitian, so I guess it'd be great to understand, do you see anything being extremely uniquely powerful to a dietitian's realm that they can do that we don't see many other practitioners being able to influence?
Absolutely. I mean, there's only so much any of us can learn about any one thing. And I do stay in my lane. I know the nuances of diet to an extent, but to have an expert dietitian who's very well-versed and passionate about the particulars, I think is key. No one of us can be everything to everybody, and our team is what makes the magic.
Absolutely. And it's one of those big ones, Tarek, people struggle with as well. So I'm not sure, like, you're a busy man, you've got lots going on. If there's one thing most of us could improve, we all say, it's my diet. And it's things we know. It's I have too many sweets, or I have too much alcohol, or whatever it is. It's the same across most of the population. So we have to have those bases covered. And if we can cover some of those main key bases within our environment, then we're in a very good space. And I think I'll loop back to one more thing, because I think it's really relevant to Total Fusion itself, is there's an overarching blanket of calmness and spiritual wellness and health layered into the company from one of the founders, which is Michelle McNeese. So Leon and his wife, Michelle. And Leon's, he's driven down that fitness, that biohacking, for lack of a better term. So all of the health span stuff, that's his baby. He really enjoys that. And Michelle's very deeply, I guess, spiritually in touch and strong with her knowledge. And she kind of provides like a layering to counteract Leon in a positive way, to put that as a focus for the company. So if it wasn't for that influence, I don't think the company would be as well-rounded to include that part that we've discussed today as being really vitally important to someone's overall health, because you do need to take it into account, because when someone feels like they're welcome in a place, when they feel good about the community they're in, they're more likely to keep coming back. And so that adherence to change that we spoke about comes from having that as well. You need to have fun, you need to feel welcome, you need to be calm and happy. You can't just turn up somewhere and get blasted for an hour and then leave again. You end up walking away sore and not smiling. So there's plenty to it, I think.
I think you guys are touching on it. It's a very integrative approach, and that's how I see Total Fusion. It's every, a department is, playing their part, every person. And I believe that's quite unique, and then opens one's perspective to is that it's not one directional. It's not just physical, not physical, chemical. It's more than that. It is that, but it also includes the psychological. It includes spiritual, at least as far as, my belief system and experience of life goes. So you take those and that becomes really greater than any one part. However, what's key is the consistency. And both of you have touched on this, is how do you get stickability? How do you get someone to train that 1 hour per day that you said, Simon, and that other pillar of nutrition? How do you get people to kind of eat in a way that kind of suits them? It's not rigid based on our own perspective or what we think is just merely right. It's presenting the facts, but then making sure that it's sort of transmuted to their experience of life, because they're going to come, meeting the patient's clients with a whole different background of experiences and culture and all of those elements. So I suppose my question is, how do you do things differently in terms of motivating that client patient to do it their way, not just, kind of perhaps your way, for example?
That's a good question. From my viewpoint, it always goes back to the evidence. So we present the evidence, we present the reality of the situation, we present what we found with a particular patient or the results of whatever experiment we might have run with nutrition, exercise, biomarkers, and we lay it out for our patient in a way that makes sense, or client rather, in a way that makes sense to them and empower them to make their own informed decisions. And, when it is somebody's informed decision, whatever path they go down, they understand why they're doing what they're doing, what they might be hedging against, what risks they might or might not be taking, and they own what they're doing, it tends to stick. Whereas if I just told someone exactly what to do, chances are it would be the same decision that we eventually led our client to, but I don't think our client would be on board.
Yeah. Is that potentially a critique of the current medical model? Is that the patient, in this instance, for example, places so much trust in the doctor being the authority? Do you think that's a bit of an inherent problem that needs to kind of be stripped away? Not to say that there's no respect toward a doctor, of course. Is that authority does that need to be unshackled a little bit?
That's a really good question. I'd have to think hard on that and get back to you exactly how to answer that.
To prevent Simon from upsetting the whole medical community, I don't think it is, right? So I think when people go to a GP, they go there because they've realized an acute problem, which is like, hey, my arm's broken. I need it fixed, right? It's a serious thing. What we often find, and Simon can probably talk to this more though, someone has brain fog, which they continually have, or they have low energy levels, which they're not bedridden, it's not detrimental in that way, but it's really affecting them quite chronically, day on day, week on week, and they can't shake it. It's like they're cold, you can't shake. And so a lot of them will come to us for, I might be within my normal ranges on my blood test that the doctor did, but I'm still not quite up to scratch. What else could it be? And so, yes, the person's within their healthy range, their average ranges that are less and less healthy population are presenting to us as now the averages fall within those marks, but they're not in optimal ranges for their performance or not in optimal ranges for their health. So it's something that Simon's been doing, and I'm talking out of turn here, but he's been doing with the pathology that we do is ranges which people have to be in and around to not be acutely sick, I guess is the best way to describe it. But when we actually look at what that could mean for their optimal performance, we could see improvement onto the top end or the bottom end or above or below, whatever it might be, to actually get the best out of that person. So that's generally why they come and see someone like Simon, or they might go and see the physio or an EP or the dietitian or the psychologist. Especially with an EP or a physio, it doesn't have to be when someone's broken and recovering from injury. It's when someone wants to avoid that in the future, or they got a little niggle and they want to optimize and they're going to do a 10K run and they want to make sure that their running biomechanics is clean. All these things are about improving from still a workable base as opposed to waiting till you're completely broken. So when you are completely broken, you need your doctor to tell you do X, Y, Z. In this case, probably are able to work with that person a little bit more. But it's the evidence that Simon mentioned is really important to show. And I'll use the dietitian's continuous glucose monitoring that we do as a great example. So you wear the patch on the back of your arm, it's got the little needle into the muscle there, picks up on your blood glucose levels. And on the app, I can see what's happening. So I can actually see in live time my blood glucose levels as it goes up and down. So when I'm feeling hangry or I'm lacking my focus, I can actually see what's going on. But from there, my next decision, I know, is going to be judged and monitored, but mostly judged by the dietitian. So I may not then go and grab a bag of chocolate because I've actually been told by my dietitian that, having some protein will be the best way to, manage my levels for a longer period of time. So I'll go and grab some jerky or whatever it is. So we give them the data, but we also show them in live time feedback where possible what we're seeing and how that relates to what they're feeling, and then what our recommendations are to improve it. But they're essentially the ones who are empowered to make the decision. And Simon's great at the way he speaks and delivers. It's very educational to the client anyway. So they're going to be learning every time they interact with someone within our facility, hopefully they should be, touch wood, learning something that they can then implement as well.
Yeah, sounds like a bit of a dance or tension between constraining and engaging, which sounds like the message there, and well articulated, Sam, on that point. Question to perhaps both of you. I might start with you, Simon. If you could change one thing about the, let's call it health, fitness, wellness, medical industry today, what would that be?
It would be earlier medical education on prevention. Particularly, I don't know that any of us would go to a dentist that didn't know how to brush or floss their own teeth, even if they were the best at doing caps and crowns and filling in cavities and you name it. And that's fantastic. But I think for their own sake, and then setting an example for their patients, a dentist knowing how to brush and floss their teeth would be, you could imagine, a profound benefit. Yet in medical education, there's no analogous equivalent when it comes to retaining muscle mass, building and maintaining VO2 max, retaining movement and stability, and everything that is amongst the biggest influencers of long-term health outcomes. I'd love to see that change. And if any medical school out there would like to invite Sam and I to be a part of that, I'd happily do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tag along with you both. And then the second question is, would there be any sort of resource, book, study, or anything of interest to those listeners out there precisely on that point, or perhaps even on muscle mass, any type of information that you recommend, or even on longevity, lifespan, etc.?
That's a great question. I could send you a list of hundreds of clinical trials and studies. I really go into the weeds on this stuff, and not in a way that I think anybody would like to absorb other than maybe myself. I will say, although I have not read this book myself, the people who come to speak to me having read it seem to have a much better baseline for us to then have a conversation. And that would be Peter Attia's book. I think it's Outlive or something to that effect. And I'm going out on a limb not having read it, but I get the impression that it is a good source of knowledge that's easily digestible.
Brilliant. What we might do is in the show notes, we'll cite that. Perhaps if there's anything else, Simon, that, you could add, or, Sam, add to the show notes to be beneficial readings or, listening.
I think just in terms of probably the best source of muscle mass motivation is just watch Pumping Iron on repeat, right? And let's just go from there. And I think we're all going to be good. Problem solved. I think we've just cured this whole issue you have. Send it to all the doctors.
Yeah.
Get everyone up to speed. We'll be fine.
Terrific. Yeah, this has been a very absorbing conversation, and really appreciate you, Simon and Sam, for taking the time and really taking us on this fascinating journey on the idea of biohacking. And perhaps what really transcends that, I think anyway, from this conversation is the lifespan and longevity. I'm sure we can rattle on more on this, and I hope that we can in the future have you both back.
Thank you, Tarek. It's great to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Stay well.
Thank you for being a part of our podcast community. We work hard to create content that we hope you enjoy and find valuable. If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support, and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you through our podcast.